Now, though, let's talk about what's definitely not free, and that is speech an awful lot of times on our university campuses. Unless, of course, you're being absolutely violently, virulently, threateningly anti-Semitic, when apparently you definitely do have a right to free speech, because our universities are, like in America, utterly messed up on this. But the University of Sussex has been fined a record £585,000 over allegations they failed to uphold free speech and academic freedom. Well, it's not allegations, they absolutely didn't uphold it. This relates to Kathleen Stock. She's a philosophy professor who was accused of transphobia for simply stating quite clearly and perfectly reasonably her views on sex and gender, i.e. that, of course, men can't become women and women can't become men, and trans women are not women, they are men. She was actually forced out of the university in 2021 after a 3-year campaign of absolutely outrageous bullying and character assassination. Well, let's talk about this with Amy Gallagher. She's a former NHS nurse, worked at the Tavistock. She's also a commentator at the New Culture Forum. Very, very good afternoon to you, Amy.
Good afternoon, Julia.
I'm really glad that after all these years, the Office for Students, the OFS, has actually conducted this full inquiry. I don't understand why it's taken 4 years for them to do. I'm not even entirely sure that £585,000 is enough of a fine for the outrageous treatment of Kathleen Stock.
Yeah, I mean, this new ruling sends a strong message to UK universities that if you bow to the trans activist mob, there will be consequences. I think a lot of universities have been acting with the assumption that if they're cowards about this issue, they will face no ramifications. But this shows that actually, if you're a coward on these issues, you have to pay, actually. And it also highlights the issue of policy, because this shows how the way in which the policy was written, that their transgender and non-binary policy effectively made it impossible for people to express their gender critical views.
Well, no, express biological fact. But let's call it what it is.
Yeah, biological fact, or just to be critical of gender ideology. Because the way in which these policies are written, and it's not just a case of UK universities, it's in the NHS and all across other institutions.
Police everywhere, yeah.
Yeah, is that they will say things like, we understand that there are people whose biological sex does not match with their gender identity. We understand that there are people who are transgender, non-binary or gender fluid. But if you believe in biological reality or you're critical of gender ideology, you don't accept that. And actually, there's no shared understanding of what those terms mean. And these policies are written as though they are accepted as fact, which means that if you have these views, you're essentially disagreeing with policy. And that's what a lot of professors and people in the NHS are put in this position, whereas if you express these views, you're disagreeing with the policy.
Yeah.
So it's really important in highlighting that, actually.
Yeah, but again, we know from the Forstater case, the Employment Tribunal, and then, of course, it went all the way to the higher levels of the courts. It is, I find it bizarre, it's protected philosophical belief that people have biological sex and it is immutable and unchangeable and real. It's not a belief, it is a fact. I mean, that's my thing. I'm perfectly happy to accept there are people who believe they're born in the wrong body, or believe that they are non-binary, or believe they're gender fluid, but they're not. And they can believe whatever they want, and they can dye their hair blue and have as many nose rings as they want. I don't care. I don't care what you wear. I don't care. But don't involve me in your fantasy. I'm just not interested. I'm quite happy to be just as polite and respectful to you as I would to anybody else. But me being respectful doesn't involve me having to pretend to believe something I know not to be true. That is a step too far. And I know an awful lot of women like me, J.K. Rowling and others, and I'm pretty sure you as well, and Claire Pearson within the studio. Fine, if you want to put me in prison for refusing to play along with that, fair enough. But I will not pretend to believe that. But what's so fascinating, the response from the university's Vice-Chancellor, Sasha Rosenil, condemned the findings, confirmed they're going to mount a legal challenge, saying the findings mean that it is now virtually impossible for universities to prevent abuse, harassment or bullying on our campuses. By the way, the same claims they've made about, we can't prevent anti-Semitism if you don't allow us to do this. It means universities cannot protect groups subject to harmful propaganda or determine that stereotyped assumptions should not be allowed upon in the university curriculum, and said the fine was wholly disproportionate, and said that free speech absolutism is as the fundamental, that the regulator had to create free speech absolutism as the fundamental principle for universities. But they're not talking about free speech absolutism as if someone could, threaten to kill someone or say anything they want. We are simply, or be abusive. We're talking about someone being allowed to state men can't become women, women can't become men, and you're not, you can put a dress on, but it doesn't make you a woman biologically or in any other way. That's not free speech absolutism.
No, of course not. This Vice-Chancellor's claim is absolutely ridiculous. The university still has to operate within the law. It's just saying, this new ruling is just saying all this extra stuff on top about transgenderism is infringing on other people's right to free speech. That's the point.
Yeah.
I mean, she's made some remarkable claims, this Vice-Chancellor. She's actually said, she's claimed, I mean, this is such a well-worn tactic. She's saying that this ruling is perpetuating the culture wars. They always say this.
Yeah.
It's not perpetuating. They started the culture wars. They wrote this policy that meant that people couldn't even express their basic facts that biological sex exists.
Yeah.
And then when people push back and say, actually, no, I've got an issue with this, like Kathleen
They're
Stock,
the baddies. Yeah.
Yeah, they're the baddie. Kathleen Stock is a very mild-mannered person. She's just essentially, you know, put this within the context of philosophy. She's not saying anything extreme, and yet just the fact that she has said that, she's perpetuating the culture.
Yeah, and we know she's not the only one. She wasn't the first. She's not the last. People who, especially in academia, but across the board, civil service, police, NHS, everywhere, it's happening all the time. Non-stop tribunals, Free Speech Union, thankfully, often helping with a lot of these cases. But people, you know, basically being hounded out of their job. The bullying that she had to leave that university. The bullying was off the scale. Her route from her home to her office was just surrounded by jeering, very aggressive bullies, accusing her of something which she had not done, a transphobia, of being a bigot, posters up everywhere, being basically supported by the university authorities and her union in doing that, the harassment of it. It was absolutely outrageous what happened to her, and unless a woman would have cowed to that, and I'm very impressed that she didn't. But it is extraordinary. You know, we hear about like, oh, it's culture wars. I've yet to hear of a single trans person or a supporter of trans ideology who's been hounded out of their job, and yet it's happening on a daily basis to people who are simply standing up for not against trans people, but for women.
Yeah, it's remarkable. I mean, the Vice-Chancellor has come out today and said that that in removing their transgender policy, it will mean that minorities will face abuse. And yet there's no reference. I mean, it's so ironic that there's no reference to the abuse that Dr. Kathleen Stock experienced.
Yeah.
And she's a lesbian professor, so her sexual orientation puts her within a minority. And the abuse she experienced was, I mean, there were people wearing balaclavas, people were setting flares, they were writing stock out, they were putting up posters. It became untenable for her to even be able to go into the university grounds. And yet there's no reference to that within this claim that they care about abuse.
What a surprise. What a surprise. Amy Gallagher, thank you so much. You've always been a fine voice in this, former nurse commentator at the New Culture Forum. Quick word from Claire Pearsall on this.
I hate the way that a university believes it has the right to shut down debate and conversation about subjects like this.
It's very weird, isn't it? But also the idea that free speech involves people bullying and harassing a woman because a teacher because of her views. It's just extraordinary. Again, I'd love to hear from someone who's been hounded out because of their pro-trans views, because it never seems to happen. It seems to go the other way around only. I don't want them to be. I want people to want to debate. Here's the thing: the people shutting down the debate are always the people with the weakest arguments.